Hey kids, thanks for joining me in the garage again. Today we're going to be doing the part 2 of the rear disc brake conversion, and that's going to be installing the parking brake kit. So we're going to go over all the parts, some of the tools that you need to do this. So stick with me here. See you in just a minute. All right, as you can see here, we've got the conversion bracket all set up. Got all the hardware for it. You do need a special tool for this, and that is basically a riv nut cert. There's many different names for it, but these have a 1/4 nut certs, and you can get this tool, simple tool from Harbor Freight. I think it's like $25 in order to install these nut certs. So those will be for installing this conversion bracket for the parking brake cable. And so, it comes with all the hardware you need to do this with, and you'll use your existing parking brake cable. You will need to cut it, and so this is an irreversible modification as opposed to the rear disc brake conversion, which you could easily convert back to drum brakes if you ordered the hardline kit, for instance, and saved your factory hard lines. And so I think to get started here, we'll go over to the truck and get some of the interior pulled out so we can get to the parking brake cable. Let's do some wrenching. All right, the first step in the process is to get the parking brake cable cut on the end. This is with that irreversible part where you're having to cut the parking brake, but that's the first step. So let's go under the truck here in the back and we'll get that done. So here's the cable end that I removed from the first part, and so we've got to get this cut off here at the end. I'll just go ahead and cut it. You can probably, like my little plastic sheath here part is pretty much toast, so but I'll just slice it here. You could probably slice it maybe even closer on the end. You will need, because what you're going to do is you're going to pull it through this cable here. This sheath that's on here will get cut up a little bit farther forward, and so you'll want to make sure that you cut it so it can move. You can see that this end here would block it moving through that sheath, and so you want to make sure and chop it far enough down. Just that simple. All right, let's go back up to the cab now, and I'll show you how to get this all measured so you know where to cut it when you've got the bracket in underneath here. All right, here in the cab, now that we have that cable cut, you'll be able to pull this parking brake cable out. And so what you want to do before we go under and put the junction bracket in that's provided in the kit, we'll want to pull out about 3 feet. And so you can either do that with a tape measure. I actually have a piece of string here. I'm going to mark it at 33 5/8, which I've done there. And so you want to make sure that you can pull, and you're going to measure from the bottom of this square nut. So let's go ahead and pull a bunch of this cable out here. Right about there. And we're going to go ahead and measure one more time before we make our mark. So our mark should be right about there. I just have a silver Sharpie. Make a nice mark. This cable is a little greasy, I think, from factory lubrication. So we're going to give it a nice big mark there. Make sure that it doesn't come off. All right, with that marked and then this pulled through, actually I'll pull a little bit more through, we can go underneath and we can then get the junction bracket put in, get the sleeve cut and everything adjusted down there. So let's do that now. All right, here we are underneath the truck. As you can see, I've got the rear drive shaft removed here. And basically what I'm going to do, this is going to be kind of hard to film. And so I'm going to go ahead and do some of this. And then we'll bring you back. We'll show you, kind of explain what I did. First thing we got to do is back here. So this is the back of the truck. This is the front of the truck. You know, and then so passenger side, driver's side. And so right up here, as you can see, this is where the parking brake cable comes in from the rear and then goes forward. And so there's a little kind of a spot where it's mounted, basically, that we got to take this off first, and then we'll pull the cable through this little hole here next. This is the fuel tank here, and then from there we can then pull the cable forward and let it hang. We've already got it pulled out in the cab, and so from there we can then start getting the actual mount done. And so the mount is right here where we're going to end up putting that conversion bracket for the parking brake. And so you know, got the rear mounts here, and then up here will be where the front ones go. And so I'll get this pulled out, get this bracket mounted, and we'll kind of go through. The front two bolts actually come in through the cab, and so when they do those, I'll bring you up in the cab and explain what you've got to do there to get those mounted. So we'll be right back here. All right, so we've got the holes drilled everywhere, and so you can see the bracket in there. So the process I did is we'll take this out here and I'll show you, you know, basically did one, drilled it in, and then did a pilot hole with that one in position. And so let me take this off here and I'll show you all of the holes we have drilled. I even got the front ones drilled up into the cabin as well. And here in a moment, we'll go up there and we can take a look at those in the cab as well. So let me pull this off for you real quick. All right, as you can see here, got the holes for the two rib nuts, one here and one here, and then the two holes that go up into the cab here. And so essentially what I did is I marked, and so you can see here, you essentially want to be about 3/4 of an inch from where the front here is of this rib. So you can see there, just about 3/4 of an inch. So with that first one, you know, I inserted the screw, got it all tightened down with the bracket installed, and then with a 1/4 inch drill, drilled a pilot hole for this one, and then removed the bracket and finished drilling that so I could get the rib nut in there. And again, using this Harbor Freight Tools rib nut tool here, and this worked really well. Just kind of get it screwed in there, pull down on it. It's you know, doing it with a wrench like I did previously when installing the rear camera worked okay, but using that tool makes it a lot easier. And then over here, you know, once I've got both these rib nuts in, I installed the bracket and then drilled the front two here. I need to deburr these. I'm going to do that here momentarily with my little Nova tool, and then we'll go up into the cabin and get the bolts inserted down here, and then button up this bracket here. And then there's a couple more things we got to do before we then get the wire cut, or you know, the parking brake cable cut, in order to kind of complete the job here. So let's go up in the cabin now. All right, here we are in the back seat. As you can see, I've removed the seat bottoms. There's a bolt here, 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 and then back here that will get those seats out of the way, because you got to get this carpet up. The two holes end up right about here coming out, and so let's pull this carpet up. We'll see where those are at. And so you should be able to see them right here. And so this is where, you know, you're drilling up from, and so we've got to put 2 bolts in here. So let me sit you down here real quick, and then we'll get those bolts in this hole here. So these bolts are the longer of the 1/4-20s that are provided in the kit. And so what you want to do is you want to get yourself one of the longer bolt along with a washer, and then just plug those in down the hole. Just like that, one there. All right, and then you're pretty much ready to go back down underneath, and then we can finish this off. There's a couple couplers and washers that you got to put in there, so let's do that now. Now underneath the truck here, you can see with these bolts coming through from above, we've got these little coupling nuts, and you'll want to put a washer on top of that. So let's do these one at a time here. And then up above, I kind of have one of the Allen wrenches just kind of jammed with the carpet there. That way it gives me enough resistance to kind of get these spun on. And what these coupling nuts are doing is giving a little bit of space there, so you can essentially get the bracket held flat and have some support rather than just having it free floating in the air there. So then we'll grab a 3/8 wrench and kind of get that tightened on there a little bit. Done with those installed, we can put the bracket on, and you'll want to get some washers in between the bracket and this screw on the back side. That might be a little bit tricky here, but we'll give it a shot. I think what I'll do first is get the front 2 in loosely, and then we'll get the back in after that. So let's get this bracket up there. Get the washers back behind here. Go ahead and snug up these front bolts here. Now, one of the things I did is I loosened the couplers a little bit since they weren't quite aligning up there. That'll let them wiggle a little bit, and then we'll get these rear fasteners all tightened up. Now what I'll do is I'll tighten the couplers, and then lastly we have another washer, and then the little nut that goes on the end here. Excellent. I have just the right amount of threads to where just barely coming out on the other side of the nut. Looks good. So the next thing I'm going to do is there's a mount for these cables here that then will mount them on the there's a tube that's a cross member on the back here, and so we'll get that on there, and then I'll show you where that's mounted at, and then we'll get these cables tied into the rear brake calipers for the emergency parking brake spot on those calipers. I'll show you where those are at. Back behind the rear axle again, I'll show you exactly where that bracket is, so you can see this tubular cross member there, and then that bracket is just drilled right in there, and then as you can see the cables there then come down, and then they come I actually modified this factory bracket here to just kind of show you know, one of the ways you can route these, and then this goes down to this factory bracket here, where once we're back at the bench, I'll show you I've did a little modification to this bracket here in order to be able to get it kind of zip tied down, and I did kind of the same thing on the other side. So here you can kind of see this bracket as well. This is the factory bracket that the wire that crosses between both the old factory parking brake, and I just kind of bent it so that this can get in there, and then I reversed it. And so then also on this, this is on the passenger side, I also made up this little bracket, just bent a piece of angle iron here in order to be able to zip tie the new parking brake cable to that to kind of get it all secured. So as you can see here, with all of it kind of tucked up. It gives me plenty of room, I think, in order to allow for axle flex. You can see it's free of the hard lines for the rear brakes, as well as the ABS sensor lines. You want to be a little bit wary of that. That way you're not pinching on those ABS sensor lines and risk ripping those out. Here on the back of the brake caliper is where the parking brake cable ends up. So I've got the one on the driver's side already done. This is on the passenger side. As you can see, this here is kind of the parking brake return spring, and this little lever is what activates the parking brake. The way the parking brake comes is there's a little hole right here that the parking brake comes through. And so I've fiddled with this a little bit, and so I'm going to bring it back behind the ABS wire, and it seems to not interfere with it as much. So you can stick it up in there like that. And then there's a little clip here, little, I think they call these E-clips. And just get that slipped on there. Make sure you got it pushed up all the way. Just push on it with the screwdriver here. That way that doesn't come off. Now the next thing is to get this down on the actual brake lever. So you can push that down there. There you go. Push that on. So next thing we'll do is I'll show you how this gets all attached there on the bracket, how we get these cables attached to the actual parking brake lever in the cabin. Enter the truck here. It's time to get this cable put into the junction bracket, the conversion bracket here. And so you can see I've marked already here where it needs to be cut. I've got a bunch of the cable pulled into the cab. That way I make sure not cut the actual inner cable here too short. And so you've got to have this at 15.5 inches from where this comes out of the cab there. And so I'm actually slightly longer. Of course, you can always cut it down if you need to. So let's go ahead. Again, just going to take the grinder here and we'll get this cut off. All right, so next thing I'm going to want to do is kind of deburr this. And so I'm going to push that inner cable in a little bit. That way I can then deburr the end of it. So now this can go into this junction bracket. So let me take this off. So with this end out here, you can put this into this little piece that you have here. And then what I'm going to do, put a little RTV around that, and then there's a heat shrink that goes around this as well that'll help with the connection also. So let's get the RTV on there. Don't need a lot of this. You want to make sure you don't get it inside as well. You want to make sure it's just there on the outside. With that RTV'd on there, we'll get this shrink wrap put on. And I just slide that over there. All right, managed to accomplish that without burning myself. Now the next thing we need to do is get this slid in here. So I'm actually going to take it off this hook here. Make it a little easier. We'll put it back on that hook. And then we'll get this thing down here. There we go, that's all snugged in there. Now let's get the cable out. Now with a little bit of the cable pulled through, we can go ahead and keep pulling this until we get our mark that we made earlier. So there is our mark. Hopefully you can see that. Glad that didn't come off even with the juiciness on here. And so what we're going to do is we route this wire around this little pulley here. And then that's now taut. And so you can see if we get a little pin here, this is the end that the wire is going to go, or the cable is going to be going into and is clamped with. So if we get this in here just loosely, you can see, you know, my mark is a little on the short side. And so I think what I'm going to do is just pull this as taut as I can get it here. Oh, hey, there's a little bit more slack from up front. So you've got all this length here. I don't know if you can see that, that you'll be able to adjust this with, but you want to, you know, be able to have it as close as possible to begin with. So I'm going to go up in the cab, just look at it real quick, confirm that that's all the way in and settled. All right, that looks good in the cab. And so if I just pull this down as far as I can, looks like I need to cut this wire maybe just a little bit longer, by about a 1/2 inch. So I'm just going to pull this out here, find my mark, and then I'll give it a slice, you know, right about here. All right, you can see I've got that cut. I'll remove this little attachment here. And then I'll once again move this cable in around this pulley. And then I'll get it attached. You've got 2 set screws in here with a 1/8 inch Allen wrench. So we'll get this stuck in here. All right, that is all the way on. We'll get this nut on the end here. And then as you can see, there's a little bit of slack in there, and so we'll adjust this down here. So I think that's about right there. We'll go ahead and tighten it up and call that good, and any more adjustment we can do in the cab. I think that looks good. Let's go take a look up in the cab and see how that sits. All right, back in the car here, you can see I've got the interior in, got the center console back in, and here at the handbrake, you can see the adjuster nuts there. And those, you know, I've got set almost all the way to the top of that adjuster screw on the end of the cable. And so I've got plenty of adjustment, probably, you know, 1.5 inches or more adjustment there, where I can tighten this up if need be. Factory specifications are, I believe, between 7 and 9 clicks to set the emergency brake. And so you can see here, oh, 6, 7 there. And, you know, so that's really tight. I think everything's nice and solid the way it's set. And so I think I don't need to adjust it anymore. All right, so let's wrap this up. All right, we're all done with this job. And so, you know, I think it turned out really well. I'm really happy the way I've got it attached on the axle and the rear. And I wanted to show you exactly where those brackets came from. And so essentially, this is the rear force transfer cable. I'm not sure exactly what you would call that. And so this is where the bell crank attaches on the passenger side. And then this bracket over here is where the bell crank attaches on the driver's side. And so this is coming down through the passenger compartment to the rear axle on the driver's side. And so this cable here kind of transfers that force over to the passenger side. And on this cable are these two, these actually had a piece of metal on them that attached to the brackets on either side of the axle. And so essentially what I did to make those brackets is I just reused them. I bent the metal so that I could remove these little plastic bushings, and then fashioned it to where it'll wrap around the new parking brake cable, and then put a little hole in it. That way I could put a zip tie on it and kind of secure those into that bracket, and then reattach them in the spot that they originally were in. And so that worked out really well. It secured them really tightly there so that they don't droop down below the axle. That was one of the things that I didn't like, is didn't want that parking cable to droop below the axle and get caught on a rock or something in the road, and essentially just, lock your brakes up essentially. So other than that, I also recycled that little tube that comes down from the passenger side to kind of create a pathway to where that cable comes over into that bracket. And then on the passenger side, as you saw, I created that little bracket, little piece of bent metal, in order to zip tie on the passenger side, that passenger side brake cable. And so it's very secure. I think it works out really well. So I hope you learned something today. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that thumbs up. If you're here for the first time, consider subscribing. You can always follow me on Instagram @WeekendWrenchTurner. Thanks for watching. Keep on wrenching.